So, hi, Amy. Welcome to Raising Inner Warriors.
Thank you, Anne. It's nice to be here.
Yes, so today we're going to be talking about listening partnerships. And I wanted to get your perspective because you've been doing it for a while
Mhm.
as a participant. And maybe you could just share about like why you decided to get involved in this and how you got started, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of listening partnerships comes from Hand in Hand Parenting, who have a website and a Facebook group that I'd been aware of since my son was probably about two, when I guess like every other toddler started kind of to display, kind of difficult, challenging behaviors and wanting to kind of assert himself and have his own free will. And I think I started reading more then about discipline and Janet Lansbury and lots of other kind of groups and pages that I thought might be helpful. So I came across Hand in Hand Parenting through reading. And within Hand in Hand Parenting, they've got a lot of different tools that people can kind of employ. But one of the things that they talk about is listening partnerships. So it's for parents to exchange listening time, generally speaking, with someone they don't know. So another parent could be really anywhere in the world, and it can be done either in person, it can be done face to face, or it can be done online. So it could be done through Zoom or just on the phone. So my listening partners, we just do phone calls or through WhatsApp. And you exchange time. So typically we exchange 10 or 15 minutes each way, and each person gets a chance to kind of speak about what's going on for them as parents, things that maybe they're struggling with, things that are hard. It can also be talking about things that are going well and why they're going well. It can be a bit of both. And the other person's role is really just to listen and hold the person in really positive regard and believe that the other person has the ability to solve their own problems. So there's no advice, there's no judgment, there's no here's what I would do if I was in your situation. And then you exchange and the other person would do the same. And you would end the kind of conversation by talking about the fact that you had belief that the other parent was a good parent, and that they were going to be able to figure it out, basically.
Mm-hmm. So is there, like, because you mentioned 10 to 15 minutes each, is that the official model of how that works?
I think it very much depends on each parent's time and life, really. I mean, you
Sure.
can probably do great extended, if you were working on what they call in hand parenting an emotional project, as in you're dealing with something which is hugely triggering or something from your own past about how you were parented that you really need to work through, you might want to have a couple of listening partnerships a week. During COVID times, when we were in lockdown, I had 3 listening partners. So I had like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, different people. But some people would choose to have longer sessions. So you could have half an hour listening each direction if you had time to do it. But I think typically most people find 10 or 15 minutes just to have the time to process what's kind of at the top of their mind. Very helpful. The kind of venting and the capacity to just get out things that you probably wouldn't say to your friends or your family, things that are maybe hard to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so does normally, like, obviously there is no one size fits all, right? But I'm wondering, like, for instance, you mentioned that you started because you had, typical challenges with a toddler, with
Yeah.
with your son, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. So then would it mean that normally, or ideally, let's not say
Mm-hmm.
normally, but ideally, would it be another mom that also has a toddler, or a mom that actually has gone through the toddler stage and is now on to something else, right? With a 7-year-old, for instance.
Mm-hmm. It really doesn't matter. And in some ways, it's quite helpful if the other person isn't in the exact same situation you are. Because I think if you're in exactly the same situation and you've got one parent saying, oh my goodness, I'm so sleep deprived, and the other person thinks, well, yeah, so am I. The tendency then is to do something in terms of like commiseration. And that isn't really what listening, although it is about venting, it isn't about it's purely about your experience being your experience, and the other person isn't chiming in with, yes, well, when I was in that situation, here's what I did, or, oh, I completely understand because that's so like what I went through. It's very much about allowing the other person's experience to be their own. So although you may feel like sometimes when you're listening to someone that you did have advice for them or you did have an idea, you wouldn't be bringing that up unless after the listening time you might ask if they were open to hearing your idea or what you'd been through. But you certainly wouldn't be making that a regular occurrence, I would say, because it would take away from the person's I suppose the belief is really that the parent is the right person to figure out their own solutions for their own child, and even within their own lives. Sometimes sometimes it isn't about parenting. Sometimes what you talk about in listening partnerships is about your relationship or your job or your life just in general, your energy levels. It can be a way to kind of explore your experience, basically.
So when someone wants to do this, you're right,
Mhm.
and they obviously, I understood that you went through hand in hand parenting, which is the organization online that created this structure. So then does that mean each person then goes through a training on actually how to do this listening properly?
No, what it means is they do have guidance. They do have a little booklet that I certainly did read that is about, I think it was about 20 pages long, about how to be an effective listening partner and what to do and what not to do. That is available. I think at the time that I started listening partnerships a few years ago, that was free. I don't know if it still is, but there certainly is guidance about how it should be done. And the main tenets of that are, like I said, not giving advice, steering clear of judgment, and really not doing a lot of talking when the other person is having their time. So not putting your own bent on it and just allowing the person's experience to be what it is. That's really what it's about. So if the person, assuming that someone feels that they can do that and give it a try, it doesn't have to be perfect, then it would just involve setting up an almost, an initial listening partnership with someone and see how it goes. Because I've had listening partnerships where it didn't really feel like it was a natural fit.
Mhm.
So maybe we decided not to continue, and that could just be a conversation. But then there are other ones that I've had for
Sorry,
years.
excuse me, just to understand, because that might be a little awkward though, right? Like, how do you
Yeah,
tell somebody? But I guess that's like going on a date, right? And saying, I don't think that this is a good fit. Is that
yeah.
really what you say? Or how do you word it to be
Mm,
like, you're not listening to me? No, I wouldn't think you would say that, but just to get a sense of like
yeah.
how often that could happen, or is it because you're not
Mm.
giving it enough time, or what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I've got a friend actually who tried out listening partnerships. She's the only person I know who tried out listening partnerships and she didn't really like it.
Oh,
She does something else. She does something called morning pages. So that comes from the book The Artist's Way, where she every morning she writes down on three A4 pages, basically whatever is at the top of her mind. So it's the same type of thing, but it's in a written way rather than saying it to somebody. She found saying it to somebody made her feel quite vulnerable and quite exposed. And I think her experience of it was quite different to mine, which was interesting. And possibly for people who find it difficult to speak out their emotions, or they're quite private people, it might feel difficult. And I suppose that speaks to your point about how it may feel awkward to say to somebody that you didn't feel it was a good fit. And personally speaking, that has only happened to me, I think, once. Um, and actually, we did have a bit of a conversation that, we would maybe leave it for a bit of time, and a bit like dating, I suppose, that we kind of didn't officially say we're never going to talk to each other again. It was just kind of what happened. But having said that, at the moment I've got two listening partners who I speak to. I speak to each of them once a week, and I've had those same listening partners for about more than 2 years.
oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah, and it's been hugely supportive.
But I wonder though, like, because I think that's really interesting that your friend that you said that it decided to go on this other journey, which sounds more
Yeah.
like a journaling experience,
Hmm.
which is very powerful in itself, right? Journaling,
Yeah.
like kind of like a brain dump or like venting to yourself and
Hmm.
allowing everything to come out on the page or on the screen. Though they say that
Hmm.
it's very powerful when you write it, actually put pen to paper or pencil
Hmm.
or whatever. However, and because you mentioned the fact that maybe some would feel more exposed, but I guess that could also be an exercise if someone is open and curious.
Hmm.
To say, well, like I'm not doing a public speech, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
find this one person. So if they, yeah, like just the idea of actually having that exchange, though
Hmm.
I can see what you mentioned earlier about you don't want people to just commiserate, right? And
Mm.
I can imagine if if both have a 7-year-old and it's a boy and the both
Hmm.
boys are having issues, or the parent I should say is having issues
Yeah.
with video gaming or
Hmm.
whatever. Yes, I could see that to be able to have a good match,
Hmm.
be that one is actually able to hold space, as they say in
Yes.
the coaching world, and not get into the vice giving or saying, yeah, me too, right?
Hmm.
I don't want.
Yeah.
So I could see how there could be some interesting, like the idea of actually matching, right? Like
Yeah.
who would be a good fit. And
Yeah.
so like you did it very spontaneously, it sounds, right?
Hmm.
Like you were
Hmm.
actually able to find, because I think you had you were seeking, you were wanting to do it. And so
Yeah.
you also found others who were
Yeah.
wanting to do it.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that, I came to Hand in Hand, like I said, when my son was about 2, and it probably took me about 5 years of reading and thinking about it to actually build up the confidence to say, actually, I'm going to give this a try. I didn't get straight into listening partnerships because I did, like my friend, I did think this is going to feel uncomfortable. This is going to feel very vulnerable. I'm not sure that I want to have other people know my inner thoughts. And because it can, a lot of the time, you can find that within a few minutes, sometimes the other person is shouting, or not shouting, but swearing or crying or having emotional reactions about things that have really upset them. So
Yeah.
you have to be open to, you have to be okay with emotion, I would say, is the first thing.
Hmm.
And you have to really hold space, knowing that people can have emotions and express them and still be good people and still want the best for their children. And that actually, that process of being able to express their emotions helps their parenting. I think if you genuinely can come from that perspective, it makes it much easier to be able to listen to somebody's hardest feelings. And I think we all need somebody to listen to that stuff.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's kind of like there's a lack in many places in the world, I would say, many parts of the West, right? Kind of more
Yeah.
individualistic, you kind of supposed to just carry on or figure it out on your own, which is
Yeah.
kind of very counterintuitive of what civilizations across time have done, right?
Mm.
So that's and I guess what I wanted to understand more is, so I understand that hand in hand parenting, they created or put into place this structure, right? This
Hmm.
idea. And so then you, like you mentioned earlier, that there is this e-book
Hmm.
or book that you can purchase. Um, but then does that mean then that people would reach out to hand in hand parenting because they're looking for a listening partner, or or are they just kind of like a dispatcher and then says, well, I'm giving you an example, like
Hmm.
because you live in England, we're going to, because of the time zone, even just that, right?
Hmm.
Here are others that are also good luck, or is it more like it, for instance, in England, Scotland or Wales or wherever, that they
Hmm.
also have groups there that have adopted that idea. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just curious because I wonder about confidentiality. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. Not
Hmm.
everybody understands that.
Hmm.
Some of us, like I come from a mental health background, so we know that whatever is talked about stays where we're in the space. But
Yeah.
others, without realizing it, might say, say that the hairdresser, right, or
Yeah.
whatever. people
Yeah.
overhear things. Yeah, she's also going through that, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think that that probably would be something, would be a pact, and the people would understand that. But
Yeah.
maybe can you talk about that? Was that ever
Yeah.
mentioned? Yeah.
Yeah, confidentiality is absolutely in there in terms of what it takes to, have a listening partnership. Absolutely. I mean, I'm a coach too, so I come from a mental health background too, so I agree with you. And I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of the people who are interested in this whole idea about listening possibly have a mental health or a therapeutic type of background.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's probably quite likely. But the confidentiality side, yeah, I think it's hugely important. And I think partially that's why it's helpful to have listening partners who you don't know, because they're not typically, I mean, one of my listening partners is in England, the other one's in Spain. Neither of them are even in the country that I'm in. So
Right.
in a lot of ways, I think that's really helpful because there's that distancing effect. You're not friends with them on Facebook. You're not phoning them outside of listening time. These people are only listening partners. You're not, there is no other connection. So when you're able to, when you're venting about, your mother or your son or whatever, you're not concerned that then they're going to tell your best friend about that, or that your job's going to hear about this. There needs to be that distancing. I think, personally speaking, I wouldn't want to have a listening partner who I had a friendship with or I saw on a regular basis, because I don't think you would then have the same sense of being able to be authentic. That's my personal feeling. I know that the person, one of the Hand in Hand founders, her very first listening partnership was somebody who she actually knew from a parenting group, and she met with him regularly face to face. But I still think she held the kind of boundaries around the relationship, that it was a listening partnership and they were not friends outside of that context. And I think that's probably quite important. And in terms of the second part of your question about how do people kind of go about getting this if they want a listening partner, they Hand in Hand have a Facebook group. They've got a Facebook page, first of all. They've got a website. People would just need to Google Hand in Hand Parenting. On Facebook, I'm obviously in the UK, so there's a Hand in Hand Parenting UK group that people can join. That within that, people just post something like hashtag listening partner, and then they write down their availability, their time zone. They sometimes write a little paragraph about how many kids they have, what they're currently struggling with, so that if they want somebody who's going through something similar or has been through something similar as a listening partner, they can seek that out. So that's typically how people find listening partners, at least in the UK. I expect there's probably a Hand in Hand USA and a Hand in Hand Canada group,
Sure.
that people could do the same thing.
Thank you. I'm thinking now, because we're using the word people sometimes, and I'm thinking, so are there men that go on there and looking for a listening partner? Like,
There are.
they rather go for, like, are they looking for other things, or are they actually, like, in sense, like, I'm actually looking for more than just like tick off the listening part, just be my partner, or is it like, what are the restrictions as far as that go, or could it be that the father is actually wanting another dad that he can vent with?
I have seen that happen. It's typically women in the hand in. I'm sure, as you'll know, and it's typically women involved in most parenting groups and most parenting pages. But I have seen men posting for listening partners, dads, and describing kind of their parenting situation. Sometimes single dads who are doing the parenting on their own, so they're kind of, arguably in the position that probably a lot of mothers would typically be in. But what I have noticed is that there tends to be, I think it's harder for men to find other men in these groups to share listening partners with, because there's just less men. There's less men seeking out the opportunity I think probably the opportunity to talk about their feelings.
Yeah, like, culturally speaking, let's just say in most parts of the world, no matter where you go, I think, maybe though in traditional societies across thousands of years, there would have been more, but that would have been kind of like part of a community experience, right? You might have an elder, right? Or a sage, or this is more like, these are your equals, in the sense you're not going, and you're, as you said clearly, we're not looking for wisdom and
That's
guidance.
right.
We're looking
Yeah.
for someone we are seeking to be heard.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I think that's for me one of the biggest parts of it. I think when I came into listening partnerships, I thought that the benefit was going to come from the talking, right? The talking about my own stuff and feeling heard. And it has, but I think a lot benefits I didn't expect came from the listening, because when you hear what someone else is dealing with, it really normalizes the fact that everybody's dealing with something, and the struggles that other people are dealing with and the feelings other people are having, that generally speaking most people in your life don't tell you about, um that you can relate to a lot of it. And it's really it's quite humbling to listen to somebody else's experience of something being a struggle and something being hard, and trying to figure out their way through it. And I personally have found it's just so useful to normalize the fact that parenting and, being a grown up is hard.
Yes. Well, it kind of sounds like like there's it's the whole idea of validating, right? Like
Yeah.
their experience without telling them, like you had said, offering advice, or yeah, like just being there. And
Hmm.
so, what, like, are there like I'm curious because I'm thinking about, you know, the idea of kids that, well, people that maybe are struggling more with their mood,
Hmm.
or they're struggling. So are there certain people, let's say moms or dads, that it's not a good fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably say, just as I would say with something like coaching, if somebody's having a, a mental health problem, for example, it
Mm.
might, although it could be beneficial to feel heard, I think possibly in that space, you couldn't use it as a substitute for therapy, I guess is what I'm saying. There would
Definitely not.
be,
Mm.
yeah, there would be, it's useful in terms of processing your emotions, gaining kind of more access to your own feelings and thoughts, and your own triggers. But if there's something that is, a diagnosable depression or anxiety or some other thing that you're dealing with, a listening partnership isn't going to help you with that, I guess I would say. I
Wow.
think, generally speaking, though, I'm, I certainly don't think that somebody with a mental health problem couldn't have a listening partnership, but you would need to also be having a way to manage the mental health side.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Yes. I can see how, yeah, it could be a slippery slope, and also just that other person may be kind of feeling a little bit of pressure, right? Like, wow, like this person's showing up and they're they're feeling really low, like in a dark
Yeah.
space, right? So,
Hmm.
so now the other question, because we're talking about kind of the dark side of living,
Yeah.
is what about, have you heard of this? So then what about if you're hearing somebody talk about, well, I got so angry, I took my belt, or I took something and I was hitting my kids.
Hmm.
Like, so is that ever brought up, like that kind of thing? Or what do you,
Yeah.
because you're not
I
supposed to
have.
be giving advice, but at the same time, this is kind of a dangerous situation, or could be
Yeah.
potentially abusive if it continues, right? But they did share that with you, and
Hmm.
maybe, and they're not sharing it with anyone.
Yeah. I think primarily it's about recognizing that our role is to the other parent. I mean, I recognize what you're saying in a safeguarding sense. I think if you were legitimately concerned about the safety of the children under this person's care, you maybe would have a duty to tell the person you were talking to that you had that concern, and possibly, try and ask them to seek some help in terms of managing their emotions. But I think, when you go into the listening partnership, your commitment is to the other parent, and your commitment is to the fact that the parent's coming into the listening partnership to try to figure out their emotions and make better choices. So I have had the experience where somebody has, disclosed an episode similar to that, maybe not so severe, but you know it has happened, and part of the listening partnership is holding the belief that the other parent is a good parent,
Yes.
and that people do lose their tempers, and people are triggered, and you can recover and you can repair, so that is part of it, and not condoning the person as a horrible monster for having lost their temper one time. So I think,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's I guess it would be something you would have to really consider if that was a regular occurrence and it sounded more serious than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then the idea of the exchange time. So is it like you mentioned that you've had during COVID, during the
Yeah,
pandemic, at its height, you had two
yeah.
or three listening partnerships. However, in an
Hmm.
ideal world,
Hmm.
is it then it's like I'm giving you an example. It's a scheduled time, always at the same time, every week.
Yeah, I think, well, because I've got the two that I currently work with every week, we're on WhatsApp. So we, just like in real life with your friend, we message each other and say, oh, I can't do Tuesday this week. Can we do this day instead? So things move around because, parents and people's lives and their work is
You
busy.
have to be
But
fluid.
ideally, yes, you would have a day and a time that every week that you typically committed to. Because if you're moving it around constantly, the chances are at some point it's going to get deprioritized.
Yeah.
And I think it is very much, I think if anyone were to try it, they would see why they wanted to prioritize it. I think from my perspective, I think I felt a real shift in the past 2 or 3 years in terms of my own kind of confidence in my own life choices and in my own abilities. Just there's something about speaking out what you think and what you believe and what you're going through that gives you this sense of kind of validation, and a
Mhm.
sense that just to feel really kind of grounded in your own perspective and why you're doing the things you're doing and why you think whatever you think is important. There's been
Yeah.
so I think what I'm saying is that people would want to prioritize that time. It wouldn't become like, oh, it's another tick box thing to do.
Yeah, or kind of like a burden or an obligation rather than a
Yeah,
choice, like a
yeah,
conscious choice. I'm making this a priority, and it's yeah, like I'm going to find time,
yeah,
find time, create time actually.
yeah.
Yeah. So then when when you're doing a partnership and you do it on WhatsApp or whatever we're
Hmm.
doing it on. So what do? You go into if you go into your bedroom, you go into a
Hmm.
space and close the door and tell your kids, or you do it when you know your kids are at school and you have that time. Like what's the ideal scenario? Because you say, well, it's only half an
Hmm.
hour.
Yeah,
Uh, However, you know what it's like with kids. So at the crucial
yes, I do.
soon as the phone, someone
Yeah,
gets on the phone,
yeah,
Mom, I need something. We
absolutely.
didn't need anything before, but
Yes,
now, oh,
yeah,
yeah. So, how do you frame that with your kids? What do you tell them?
yeah. Well, I've got one of my listening partners at the moment has a baby. So she's quite often breastfeeding her baby while we're doing listening time, or she's literally changing nappies while she's doing while she's doing listening time. So I don't want people to think that just because you have young children around you can't do this, because you absolutely can. Or even toddlers, it is possible. With my own kids, what I did during kind of COVID lockdown, they were both at home. At the time, I had a 4-year-old and a, how old was he? 9-year-old. For quite an extended period of time, neither one of them were in nursery or school. So they were at home all the time, and I had to do, I wanted to do my listening partnerships 3 times a week. So the way I used to do it was we would do some kind of homeschool stuff, and then I would arrange my listening partnerships around about 10 o'clock when they were ready to take a break. And I would set them up with snacks and drinks before I even made the call. And I would give them a bit of screen time, honestly, is how I did it. I
I can
basically said,
imagine that
okay,
would work. Yeah,
yeah.
that would work.
And
Yeah,
then,
no
they'd
interruptions
done,
there.
yeah. And they'd done a bit of, a bit of, something before then. And then they had this little bit that was automatically going to be a break anyway. And I also told them both, okay, I'm on this call. I don't want you to disturb me. And, unless something's on fire. and, and that if you manage to do it, then, it's that's great. If you subscribe to bribery, you can give them a chocolate button afterwards. You do it however you need to do it, because as I say, it becomes important. And in times like being a stay-at-home mum, if you've got children who are, under 5 or whatever, and you've got children around you all the time, having this time to connect with another parent who understands what you're going through and is listening with the belief that you're going to figure it out and that you're a good parent, sometimes is an absolute lifesaver.
Yeah, because you get off the phone and your mind has shifted, right? When you've been able to vent, so you're not. I could imagine that just having that time, then you end up less in reactive mode because you become
Yeah.
more aware. And of course, that's the whole point of this, right? Is to become more aware of my moods, my emotions, my thoughts, my behaviors, like just venting about it. And you say, yeah,
Hmm.
that wasn't a good choice. I took it out on my son and start yelling at him. So I can imagine, though, listening to all this, is that a listening partnership could be beneficial across the lifespan, right? Like,
Absolutely.
so I'd heard, and maybe you can correct me, I had heard, I thought it was happening in the UK, something about a listening partnership idea anyway, with teens being able to talk to each other. Or, well, I think the idea, I know that's there in Canada where they would have like a peer counselor in a high school. So
Hmm.
that if the kid didn't want to talk
Yeah.
about the fact they were bullied, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of challenges just around being able to talk about it. So then they would be able to talk to a peer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that was powerful. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, and also with
Hmm.
other demographics, uh,
Mm.
young adults, people that have
Yeah.
retired, all kinds of people that I can imagine could benefit. I mean, I think it's, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I certainly don't think this just applies to parents, not at all. I think I started off obviously coming from the perspective of being a parent of young children, and I'm still in that. But more often than not, what I'm talking about in my listening partnerships nowadays isn't stuff to do with parenting. And I think that it would benefit, like you said, I think it would benefit teens. I think it would benefit older people who were maybe isolated and lonely. I think it could benefit young professionals. I think this concept could
Mhm.
benefit anybody, to be honest with you. And since I started listening partnerships, I've gone on to train as a coach, a personal and professional coach. And within that, there is this model by this woman called Nancy Klein, who writes this book, Time to Think, about thinking partnerships. So it's a very similar concept to listening partnerships, about um, basically just allowing someone else to to speak out their thoughts. So the only question that she would be asking somebody, for example, in a coaching session, was, "What do you think? What do you think about, and what are your thoughts?" So then it gives the person free reign to talk about whatever they want to talk about, and the coach comes from a perspective of being non-judgmental and completely open in exactly the same way. And clients typically find it a bit strange because they're doing, all the talking, and they're talking about their thinking and going into that, but at the end of it they often say how massively beneficial it was. So
Mm,
just having the time and the space to feel heard, I think, would benefit anybody who tried it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's really, I like that. What do you think about, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So what do you want to think about, and what are your thoughts? And then
Want
it
to think
just
about. Okay.
yeah,
What do
sorry, I
you
missed that
want
bit.
to
What do
think
you want to
about?
think about, and what are your thoughts? And then from there it's just the other person's perspective. And I mean, I suppose, in life you don't get the opportunity to often think about what are my thoughts, what do I think about that, and maybe why did I react like this, or why was this difficult. A lot of the time, unless people have a regular habit of journaling or doing something like listening partnerships, a lot of the time this stuff is really murky, and it isn't clear to you why
Yeah,
things are happening the way they're happening.
yeah, definitely. So this, we could talk for a long time. I can see. I'm very curious about all this. So I would just like to conclude by asking you, what does it mean to you to raise an inner warrior? Since this is the name of the podcast, if you can think of it.
Yeah, I think I would say that to me, it's about resilience and about, I think it links into the listening partnership thing about wanting to be kind of emotionally intelligent and aware of your own feelings and your own responses to things, and becoming really clear about your own self, and that process allows you then to put into place boundaries with other people and make choices based on your inner kind of wisdom, I guess, rather than being pushed or pulled around by society's expectations or your parents or your peers. Just to have a real sense of your inner voice, I think, is probably the main thing that I would kind of want for my children. I think that's really, really important. And I think it's getting better, you know. I think society is getting better in terms of teaching these skills around feelings and around relationships and consent and all these boundary ideas. This is a movement now, but when I was a child, I don't think there was much understanding about any of this stuff. And it's taken me a long, long time as an, you know, to get to the point where I'm realizing, oh, actually, I do have a right to my own boundaries, and I do have a right to say my opinion, and I can choose, you know. And I hope that's not going to be the case for our children.
Yes, definitely. Well, thanks so much, Amy. I appreciate. And so just to conclude, you said that it's basically going into the website Hand in Hand Parenting, either .com or .uk, or in Canada, I guess we would just probably Google on Facebook and find it.
Yeah.
Or just Google it.
Okay. They can find, if people just search Hand in Hand Parenting, you'll find it on Facebook, you'll find the website. And I'm sure there will be, like I said, in the UK, we have Hand in Hand, we have a Facebook group, but I'm pretty certain there will be equivalents in lots of different countries in the world. And if there isn't, try joining the UK group if you can figure out your way to have a time that works.
Sure.
It can be it can be through WhatsApp, it can be through phone, it can be whatever works for people. So
okay. Yeah. Thanks very much. Okay.
Thanks, Anne.
Okay, bye.
Bye.